As this real adventure continues, it is all about becoming more aware, as this was the original idea when Darwin, Gross and Harry were given the opportunity to do something real and wonderful, but they became so obsessed with themselves that the RealGuides made the deal, and now the reptilian aliens have them. Who would believe such a thing? Life is so much bigger than all of us. Very few people ever catch on to the all is. It is far too real. Paul had started off with the hue word, which is from humanoids, and Darwin, Gross and Harry were to try and fulfill something beneficial for the humans, but they didn't. That is, they didn't do what they did the way they could have, but they did not fail. Seems rather funny, doesn't it? Because what they did has turned out as it has now become the greatest wake-up event ever. This now becomes the best part for you as the reader. I saw the hue destroyed as the old connection it was. The new you has always been the true reality of the all is. It is true that human history has recorded the hue word, which was written by the reptilian aliens, as was the Bible and so many other so-called sacred doctrines. This planet is almost completely controlled by a Kek, the rod of power, which is very real, as Paul referred to, was the first step to what is now the new wave is Duane and Ava. In 2014, the new wave is the new man and the new woman. We are real now. Human history, as we have come to know it, has all been controlled by reptilian aliens. They have controlled the United States from the days of George Washington. From Vatican headquarters comes all the orders to create the world wars, the Cold Wars, and all the takeovers that are seen on a daily basis in so many different ways that most people do not see. Life is not a belief. What is taking place today on the Earth and many other round worlds is the effects from all the causes the reptilian alien lords have created. They try to be very clever with their deception, to where they make their humanoid creations believe that what is taking place with the polluted and poisoned environment is either from their invented gods, something mysterious, or that it must be all the people on this earth not understanding the rules and regulations of the systems they have created to enslave everyone. Their whole demeanour is to keep the little minds of the earth so busy that people do not have the time to see what they are doing behind the scenes. The reptilian alien lords and the OWO lords, One World Order, rule the earth from their reptilian Capitol building in Rome, the Vatican. The world is led to believe they are for the good of the people. and they are the holy rollers, so to speak, when in reality the very opposite is true. Deception owns this world, as the one world order lords hire the time trappers to subdue innocent people into a seduction with the influence, and then tap-lining them in their astral bodies while they sleep in their dreams. Here is where a person needs real guidance to start to recognize what is taking place with their life here. Otherwise, they will continue to stay asleep and be forced into agreeing with this passing dream. You make the choice. As Paul Twitchell took his turn first with Rebazar, giving him what was known then as the Rod of Power, Paul knew what he had to do to reach people and start this new adventure with the All Ears. At the time, Paul had to make what he was creating fit into what this world had already decided, which is mainly along the lines of the reptilian alien god Grog. But of course, Paul could not expose the scary reality of the reptilian alien lords and their invented gods and what they were doing to everyone, so he made his presentation along the lines of the spiritual idea to make people feel more at home while they were still on Earth, and trying in some small way to wake up to what he was teaching them. Behind the scenes, the Calorm god was also making plans to take over what Paul was creating, as he was gearing up his reptilian forces, and most of all, looking for very special agents on the Earth to disrupt and seduce Paul's membership, which is now taking place today with a geek master Harry and she tap-lining Joni. Paul had brought a lot of people up through his initiations very fast to establish what he was doing, and when he left, so did most of the people who were in the higher ranks, as they could only see so much at that time. The initiations were not as they appeared to be, but only for those who could see. The Calorm god is very clever, and most people are seduced by so many different ideas, and mainly their own emotional tap-linings. This world today is caught in a time warp like never before. The one world order has gotten people to believe in the past and the future more than the true reality life is now. As long as people have their personal emotions and attention scattered all over time and space, then they are the effect of everything around them, and at the same time they do not see the isness now is. All life is now. This is real. A person can think whatever they want to with their mind, but only now is real. Only when you take the risk will you know. My entrance with this adventure. Down and down I went, from the real Unuversities into the darkness of the psych realms. I had made the decision, and at the same time I questioned myself. As I went through the deep dark border, then into the etheric realm, I was suddenly with an encumbered body once more. My real freedom from the seventh life level was now left behind, as I had to continue downward into the God realms of time and space. I could hear the roar of laughter from the Kalorm god as I passed through the huge mental realm. I could feel the intimidation of those asleep to the all ears, as I was the one to bring forth what almost no one wanted on the earth, real truth and real freedom, as I flew ever downward to gain the experiences I needed as a collective impression before entering the limited physical body. I continued to experience the restrictions of the bodies I was taking on once more. As I went through the causal realm, I could sense the memories once again of all those lifetimes of torture and cruelty from the invented systems of control, and finally to the life I had on Earth before this one as the Golden Warrior. As I continued on, I was feeling the drudgery and involvement of so many minute emotions of the past that were crawling all over me as I went onward through the astral realm and then finally into the vast darkness of the solid physical realm. With the darkened sky in the background and millions of stars sharing their light, I could see the earth very clearly as I passed the moon off to my right. As I felt myself being guided to my position of return, I was wondering how I would make it through another tested life on the infamous floating rock, the Earth. Closer and closer to the Earth I sailed, until I went through a cloud layer that was spread so far and wide and high above the vast land masses. I flew with invisible wings from horizon to horizon like a bird looking for its nest. With my great view, I could see the dotted lights of civilization everywhere as I soared down into the place that I would be starting my new earthly experience again. It was a very rainy evening in the location of my destination, and at some point I penetrated the walls of some unfamiliar building, then into a room where a woman was lying on her back. I felt very resistant as to being here, and I felt the presence of others with me. Opening Scene 1. I was born to a farm girl from the northernmost state in the US, Minnesota. My new mother was lying on the hospital bed, making funny noises, and looking up at the doctor and trying to push my new little body out. I could sense that she had done a good job creating the body form for me. I was actually viewing her from one side of the room, and at the same time moving back and forth from the little body inside of her as I was practicing my escape. I did not want to get caught in that little vehicle just yet, and so I was preparing it to loosen up. Even before I arrived in the room, I knew that I was in the wrong place, yet I had to be here to get everything started with my new life. Watching what was taking place was not really of any interest to me, because I had been in this scene so many times before, and somehow I survived it. I already knew the earth was a strange place, but I was here for a reason, and somewhat willing to get on with it. One may wonder how I already know all of this, and so to find out more information is in book 1 of the Adventures series, From Then to the New Nowness. Well, I was not entirely in the body yet. I still had the advantage of being outside of it, and at the same time experiencing it without any restrictions. After thousands of lifetimes, I had learned so many lessons about the physical bodies I had taken on. Suddenly, and wouldn't you know it, I saw my new body come screaming out of my new mother. As I watched, I knew I really didn't want to be here. I turned to my friend who guided me to this place and said forlornly, "Rebazar, do I really have to get into that thing again? I know I agreed to this, but now I am not feeling too good about this place. I already miss Shiz and my home on the 7th life level of the All Ears." He laughed a bit, then nodded his head up and down so slightly. The impression I received from him was that I needed to learn a lot more, and this life would do it for me. I had already been shown why I was coming into this life, but now that I was here, I didn't want to go through with it. It's like being a child, and you're told about going to the doctor, but when you actually do, you want to run. My new mum was very young, too young at this age to have a kid, but she was tough and had a strength about her. I had had many mums before this one, and I knew what relationships were like, a lot of drama. There would be a lot more drama to go through as I grew up, and then to get through before I would be able to get on with what I was here for. It was March, which meant I was a Pisces, far from my real element, the great ocean of life, which the Pacific Ocean was a reflection of in the material realm. I knew that I had to do something to get this girl's attention, so that I could live where I wanted to, but I was really too small to make a difference right now. I wanted to get to the big ocean on the west coast, where I had been in my previous life. From then to now, the return of the real, that I write about in a new book 1. Well, here I was, only several minutes old, and I was already thinking about getting on with things. The real me knew what to do, but I had to wait for the little me to get bigger and become familiar with this new life and all the human silliness I would be dealing with. I already knew my new mother was a very independent girl of 19. She was a little young to handle me, but then again, I had to enter somewhere, and she was the best choice at the time. I think the whole idea of having me was against her will. My new dad was the one who wanted to have children. Most people don't know they can choose their parents for the most part before coming back into a new life on Earth. People on Earth seem to think that they have made the choice to have children, but it takes an agreement from all those involved. After the new little vehicle exited her body, I was taken to the clean-up area where two big people, who I had never seen before, eventually brought me back to my new mum. We both sat there looking at each other. She would smile, and then I would try and smile, but it was hard, because the lights in the room were so bright, and the new body that I was in felt so weird and restrictive. She didn't seem to realize that I had just come from a very dark place, and now I was in a whole new world. This was not fun. If most people paid attention to each lifetime they are destined for, they would begin to see the real cycle of birth and death. However, what happens is they get caught up in the illusion of the formulation of what appears to be life in action, where in reality it is merely a process that we are all going through to become more aware. Through the restriction of a physical body, which is the elementary stages of the real you, each one of us eventually becomes motivated to explore beyond all that has been considered in a material sense and move ourselves into a real life. After this and that went on for a while, I was getting sleepy. I wanted to dream about the big body of water that I would be living near, once I got something decent to wear and some shoes that fit. I began to realize that these people really didn't understand my nature as to the kid I was, and that I was born to explore and live the adventure. Someone who wanted to get on with things. I had a lot to do this time around, so much more than my new mum would ever know. I didn't have time for all the funny little things that I knew my mum would put me through, but I was willing to, somewhat. I'm sure by now many are wondering how this little innocent newborn knows and sees what I do. Simple. I was trained to be more aware, not an intellectual, but more real and centered. Anyhow, after all that went on, I finally did fall asleep and began to dream. I was suddenly standing beside my dream come true, the big blue Pacific Ocean. It is a wondrous body of water that reminded me of my real home on the 7th level. It isn't as good as my real home, but it was good enough for this place. I was now in the new body, and having to relate to the new little mind I had to deal with. There is one thing good about a new mind, and that is, it knows nothing. I was centered with real being, and forgot everything else while in the experience. I stood there watching the waves roll onto the shore and listening to the wonderful sound of the breaking surf as it rolled in and made its way to the land. The sun was shining overhead in a clear blue sky and reflecting the wonderful light from above into my awareness. It was all a dream come true, a dream within a dream that was all mine. All of a sudden, something happened. It was freezing. I was back with my new mum and stuck in the body again. All I could consider was how to get back out again. We were leaving the strange building that I had flown into earlier. The rain was still coming down pretty hard when we left the place. Then we got into something which I overheard them call a car and drove off. Some new person was driving. My guess was it was my new dad, because Mum and he kissed. As we drove along, I watched the night lights that seemed to pass by so quickly as my new mum held me. The lights made me sleepy as I rolled around a bit in her arms. I was very aware of what was taking place, but at the same time I had to deal with the limits of this new body. I suddenly didn't know anything from my past while in the body. I was now in this new life and having to try and figure things out all over again. I knew I had a past, but it was being blocked from me. Eventually, we were out of the big city and driving on a dirt road that was wet from the rain. We were headed for the farm, which is the home of my new mum. It was quite a ways from the main road. This gal is a real hick, I thought to myself. We finally reached the house and circled a large pig pen that was in the middle of what you might consider to be the front yard. Actually, there was nothing but front yard. The place was huge. 2 older people came out of the house to greet us as the car came to a stop. I patiently watched and waited as the big people did their role playing with each other and made the scene rather humorous as I watched. The older woman came up to the car and said, "Let me see the new baby, Maxine," as she began to tap on the window while the rain was drenching her. I had to laugh to myself as she was being drenched. Mum smiled and said, "Okay, let me get out of the car first, Mum." Well, this was nice to know. My new mum was Maxine, and this was her mum. Now I was wondering who my new dad was. No one mentioned his name at all. They were too interested in me. I watched the rain as it hit the windows. The stuff was real fascinating to me and kept my attention the whole time. My mum opened the door and handed me over to her mum while she made it to the house, as Dad was following behind her. Mum's mother really seemed like a nice old gal, even while she was all wet. After the long ride, I was getting a little hungry and bored. I soon realized that no one was going to listen to me unless I made some real noise, so I started to whine a little. The old lady just rocked me and tried to shut me up. I could tell that she wasn't getting the message yet. Not at all. Mum and Dad didn't seem to notice either, since they were attempting to take off their wet clothes. I knew I had to do something more straightforward. Okay, I thought, here it goes. Then I let them have it with both barrels and screamed at the top of my lungs. At first real funny, as everyone started running around and wondering what they should do first with the little baby. "It sounds like he must be hungry," said my new dad, as he was trying to shake off some of the water from his clothes. Wow, I thought, this man can read my mind. I soon began to realize that I had a pretty cool dad. I was really hungry, and they did the right thing to feed me. It is the best thing, being held and fed at the same time. After that attention-getter, I knew all I had to do was scream a little, and things would be fine. After my little meal with Mum, I was so content and mellowed out. Mum put me on the giant sofa so that I could watch the big people move around and do their funny things. Then I fell asleep and went back to the Pacific Ocean. I was standing in the bright sunshine again and enjoying myself as I looked out over the clear blue water. I could see some big fish in the distance, jumping up and down. I loved this place and how real it always seems. I knew that I had been here before, but it really didn't matter how I knew. All that mattered is that I was here now. I stood for the longest time just looking at the great ocean and all the reflection of the sun pouring down upon it. This is really living, I thought to myself. After a while, I returned to the farm with the elders. All in all, everything seemed pretty cool with these people. Time and events moved at their own pace here, and I was fine with all of it. I got to hang around while everyone else just kept busy doing all the things that farmers do. Mum and Dad really wanted a place of their own, but they were so young and had no money, and so they lived on the farm with my mum's parents. This first evening at the farmhouse is something I will never forget, but I soon did as I grew up and older. To be continued.